Okay, so this week we turn our attention towards my ancestors, sort of, the Anglo Saxons, who controlled much of the British Isle from 440 CE to 1066 CE. So these are considered probably the first English. So much of the source material for this lecture comes from these two sources here: the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, who was written by the Venerable Bede in 731, and then the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, which was kind of like a census ordered by Alfred the Great, approximately 890. And there's a link there where you can see some of the actual chronicle. Now, Rome is being attacked from all sides by 400 CE. They're coming in from the north. They're coming in, from the south. Their empire on all areas are being hurt. And so those who are ruling Rome at this time decided to pull the troops out of England because they figured it wasn't worth having their troops there. And they bring them home to defend the homeland. Now, this allows the Anglo-Saxons to take control of England, or what's considered like the British Isle. We aren't sure if the Anglo-Saxons were already there in England prior to this, having been hired as mercenaries to fight another threat, which were the Picts, or if they invaded this time after the Romans had pulled out. But we do know they're made up of the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, who are all Germanic or Scandinavian. Jutland is kind of off in the Scandinavian area. Now, what is significant here is that their culture was so strong, the Anglo-Saxons, as to not be unduly influenced by what the Romans left behind or by the English themselves. They keep their culture fairly pure. So little of the Celtic or Latin language entered the language of the Saxons, and most of the stone structures that the Romans had built were replaced with the wooden structures of the Saxons. Of course, things like the aqueducts, the baths, especially in Bath, England, did remain. They also, for centuries, kept their pagan religion. This is important as well as we look at Beowulf, because it will be quite some time before Christianity finally makes some inroads, and these people turn to Christianity. Now, let's look at the major institutions of the Saxons. So as I said in the last slide, they're primarily a group of pagans who worship gods such as Thor and Woden. So those of you who are in know a little bit about the comic book world, there's Thor that they just made a movie of the last 2 years ago, I think. They have strong tribal ties. This is very important. This means that one dies for one's tribal leader, or if you're king or leader, and if that king or leader is killed on the battlefield, then you're to keep fighting on that field until either you win or you yourself are killed. It's somewhat of a dishonorment. You're dishonored if your king dies in battle and you don't die alongside him. Now, a warrior is not supposed to outlive his king in this case. So this plays a role in the story of Beowulf. You'll see that. There are also family ties, and these are important, because the tribal ties expand from that. And what's important is if a family member is harmed, society requires that family member be avenged, or that monetary restitution be made. So we'll also see this in Beowulf. Now, here are the various classes of people who existed during this time. I'm not going to go through them all. But the king would be at the top, then earls and ealdormen that would rule. The Witan there is like the king's council. And Knut was a king of not only England, but also Denmark and Norway. Now, he died in 1035, just 31 years before the Norman invasion of England, which will end the Anglo-Saxon rule. So the fact that he has established certain things doesn't matter so much, since it won't last for that long, though he is an important king. Now, a major concept that we need to be aware of in order to understand Beowulf, and it's a concept that holds this society together. It's what they're based on. And this is one of the things we've been seeing throughout this course, is that through the literature, the values of a society are communicated, and also the people who are brought into that society or are born into that society are inculcated into those values, are adapted to the values through this literature. It's one of the ways. But for the Anglo-Saxons, comitatus is a huge concept, and this encapsulates the major values such as the warrior doing everything he can to protect his king. Right, so like we said, you don't allow your king to die on the battlefield if you can help it, and if he does, then you're supposed to die with him. Now, for the protection, the king in return promises to protect his warriors and to reward them with the spoils of war. So we see this when Beowulf is victorious. He's rewarded. This makes the king the giver of gold and land, and gives the king the power to make a man. Unlike here in the United States, where you can just work at a career and or begin a business to make your riches, to make your name for yourself. Here you're kind of reliant upon the king, so it gives the king a great deal of power over those under him. Now, I had said that Saxon society is one of revenge, and from this we get a society based in feuds. So much like Sean Connery in The Untouchables, which if you haven't seen, it's an old movie, but it's a great movie. The attitude is, you kill one of us, we kill one of you. So it's an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth type of attitude, even though these people do not know the Old Testament. So it's not hard to see, however, the problems with this kind of philosophy, and many times these feuds spiral out of control. In this country, the almost fable is of the Hatfields and McCoys, but in Beowulf, where it's spiraled out of control, there's Hrothgar, the King Beowulf ends up helping, is in a feud with Grendel. Now, these feuds, however, aren't just families going at each other or tribes going at each other, people going at each other. They're recognized by the law. They are understood to be, a basis of society, and there are rules that have to be followed, such as the monetary compensation for the harm done, as I mentioned earlier. And in fact, there's actually a list of body parts and what their value are. Coming down finally to what that an actual life is, and so you're supposed to compensate somebody monetarily if you're not willing. Once you cut a man's arm off in battle, or in one of these feuds, if you're not willing to have your own arm cut off, then you pay for whatever an arm is worth. Now, another major issue that shows up time and time again in Anglo-Saxon literature is the concept of exile. Now, you say, well, so what? Exile, what's the devastating issue here? And the fact is, though, it's the ultimate price to be paid in a feud. You can be exiled during a feud. And the problem is you have to consider this world that these people are living in. It's not like today. I mean, if I was to exile you from Detroit, you just go move to Grand Rapids, or, if you want, move to Sacramento, California, LA. You can't do that. There aren't cities. And the other people in the country, there's not a central king. There's like 7 different kingdoms and 7 kings, but they may be your enemy, and they're not going to accept you in there. So what ends up is you're alone in a harsh world, and you're defenseless, and it's a very scary idea to actually have to fend for yourself in a fairly wild and natural world. All right. Therefore, it's fearful. Now, in Beowulf's father is exiled, and as you finish the story, you can keep in mind who you could see being exiled also at the end of the story. All right, so hopefully this gives you enough background to make sense of the various events that occur in what could be argued is the oldest existing work of English literature, and it definitely is of Old English in Beowulf. I hope you enjoy it. Lots of fights, things like that. You can watch the movie. The movie's horrible, but you can watch that if you want to help you get through it.